Well, hello everybody, and welcome to this webinar on how to create a standout CV. My name's Jill Fugerio. I'm your chair today, and I'd just like to welcome you all and welcome our panelists who've just put their cameras on. So thank you for that. As I said, my name's Jill Frigerio. I'm your chair today. So my job here at Warwick, where I'm an associate professor, is to train career development professionals in how to help you with your career. And that includes, of course, your CVs and your application documents. And before that, I was a careers advisor myself. But the important thing that you for today is that you hear from our panelists, who I'll introduce in a moment. Now, many of you have already submitted questions as you booked for the webinar, and we've used those to prepare some initial thoughts. You can also ask questions after the presentation in the live Q&A that we will have at the end. And there's a speech bubble with a question mark inside that you can use to ask your questions. So first of all, I'll kick off by introducing our panelists. You can read more about them in the information online about the webinar, but just to invite everybody to say hello. First of all, we have Andrea Skelly, who is Business Development Manager at Unitemps. Andrea's got over 20 years experience of working with hiring managers, so she knows what they're looking for in a CV. Welcome, Andrea.
Thank you.
We've also got Jenny Hammond, who's a careers and employability advisor at Liverpool John Moores University. Jenny's worked with many students on their CVs for everything from part-time work through to graduate jobs. Hello, Jenny.
Hi, morning everyone.
And we also have with us Amanda Bramall, who's currently Head of Human Resources at SE Controls. Amanda, being an employer, of course, knows exactly what she's looking for when she's hiring and how she interprets that from the CVs that are in front of her. Welcome, Amanda.
Hello.
So that's whose expertise we have in the room, and we are going to begin by discussing some of the questions that have been submitted in advance. And we had a number of people asking us about whether there's an ideal layout for a CV. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about that first of all. Andrea, over to you. What are your thoughts about CV layout?
So your CV is obviously your foot in the door to a prospective employer. I think it needs to show personality, but it also needs to be professional, concise and clear. So my tips in brief, and I know Jenny will add a bit of meat on the bone to this. My tips in brief are to make sure you've got your contact details at the top of your CV. People forget, so your name, your address, your phone number, email address. Then you need to put a professional statement, personal statement, no more than around 150 to 200 words. And it should cover who you are, relevant work experience, what you're looking for, and sort of a bit more about any sort of specific achievements. Then I would say your education is next, especially, if you're a graduate, recent graduate, you've worked hard to get that degree. You need to be proud of it, and that should be, there and be able to hit somebody in the face, not literally, obviously. So then your A levels with grades, and your GCSEs, you don't need to list them. But, if you've got 9 GCSEs, all grade A to C, put 9 GCSEs, A to C, maths and English included, because that's really important. And people want to see that you've got a good level of English and maths. Then you go on to your employment. So your employment should start with your most recent first. So that should be the first job on your CV. So again, the name of the company you're working for and the dates that you were there. Don't put 2020 to 2021, because that could actually be 2 years of employment, from January the 1st, 2020 to the 31st of December 2021, or it could be 1 day. So, month and year of employment. Look at the job spec that you're applying for, and then highlight any achievements in your current role, and your duties in bullet point. So take it out of the first person. So not I did this, I do that, but responsible for, and link it to the job spec. So if the job spec says you'll be leading a team, so responsible for 10 people, and then link that into your skill. So what does that actually show? It could be communication skills, negotiation skills. So link it all in. And then my key things really are, make sure you use the same font throughout the CV. Make sure you spell check it, grammar check it, get somebody else to proofread it after you've written it, and give them the job spec so that they can see whether or not you're hitting the salient points. And don't use a thesaurus. Use language that feels comfortable to you. It feels natural, because that shows who you are. It's adding that personality. And that's about it, really, is in terms of the format. I know we're going to give you a link to an example CV so that you can all have a look at that afterwards. But in terms of format, that's what I suggest. And then I think, like I say, Jenny's got a bit more meat to add into that. So thank you.
Lovely. Thanks, Andrea, for getting us started there. So some really good thoughts about the way that a CV should look, and how to start thinking about its content. And if you are wondering how that might apply to you, perhaps if you don't have A-levels or GCSEs or don't have much experience, don't worry, because we're going to get into that. I can see lots of questions coming in the chat. It would be really helpful if you could put those in the Q&A, which next to the chat at the top of your screen is the speech bubble with a little question mark in it. Thank you very much. So that's some thoughts from Andrea. I know that lots of people want to know what employers look out for in a CV. So Amanda, we'd like to invite you to comment now, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. Are you hearing me all right?
Well, I certainly am. So yeah,
good. It's only I've had to have IT fix my microphone on Teams today, so I was just conscious. I would absolutely concur with everything that Andrea said. But the one thing I would actually slightly change, and this is not meant to be controversial, this is just because as an employer, that's what I want to know more first. I actually encourage candidates, when I'm helping them with their CVs and even our own current staff, is to actually put their first job role at the top, not the education. I would actually put the education lower down. Not that it's not important, but the first thing an employer will look for is what you're currently doing. And I think what's important with that is to, exactly as Andrea said, is to link in your key achievements and to really, and also what you delivered, how successful you were, what you might do differently. And I would also encourage people to lay out in bullet points, because it's much easier for employers to follow that rather than a long-winded paragraph that you can get lost in some of the wording and lost in some of the good stuff. And I think also one of the things I've seen more recently, which I quite like, and I have to credit my son for this actually, who's a uni student, is actually on the border to do what I would call a bit more a modern layout, or rather than a traditional one, is to have your contact details down a panel at the left-hand side of your CV, and perhaps add a very comfortable colour. So not too bold, not too bright, perhaps a modest blue, or perhaps a pale pastel shade, which actually has your contact details down that left-hand panel, which gives you the majority of the front page to then go through your employment. it then means that you can keep your CV quite succinct. Personal profile, exactly, completely agree. But your personal profile to me shouldn't be about your skills within work necessarily, but tells you more about your personality of the person. I want a little bit of an insight as to what type of person you are. So are you a great netball player? Are you really passionate about Aston Villa or whatever? And I just picked that up because they were playing last night. I'm not a Villa fan. But just making sure that really sells you right at the top of your CV, then following on with your first job and what you succeeded in that, what were your personal proud moments, what as I say was your task or what was your result, because again employers will look at good results and how that, whether you worked with a team or independently, and also really play on those successes so that you can pragmatically put them in. I delivered the profit margin up to 70%, or I succeeded in creating a new team that delivered this or whatever. So very much in pragmatic terms what those are. Because to my mind, a CV is getting you from the maybe pile from someone like me into the interview pile. So it's about finding those standout moments. So you really have to emphasize the things that you want to sell about yourself well. And certainly if you've got an honours degree or you've achieved a great sporting achievement, get those all in as well. Make sure, exactly as Andrea said, be proud of the fact you've got a great success story in terms of your academic results. I have to say, in very respectful terms, as employers, we look more about the fit of the person than we do about the educational results. Of course, degrees are important. We don't in any way underplay them, but we're just as keen to see the people that perhaps haven't got A levels or a degree, but we want to see what you have done and why. Absolutely, you should bespoke a CV to make sure it fits for the employer and to the job spec. And I would also go for the fact that hobbies are very important as well. And even if it's you do more pastoral, I've had a lot of people say CVs that they're a hiker or a walker. That's just as important as someone that's a very successful football player or whatever it might be. And I would also say you don't necessarily these days need to worry with a cover letter. I think it's quite acceptable to send a CV that's well written and well laid out, attached to an email that just says, further to your advert, I attach my CV. Should you need any more details, let me know. I think it's also good to see referees on there, particularly work ones, but I'm equally as keen to see character ones because those will be taken at the point of appointment as well. So I see very much a CV as your selling tool. And I think that's the key word. It is a selling tool to get you into that interview pile, because most people will be much more successful in an interview than they will be writing a CV. So all that CV is doing is getting you that interview. So you need to keep that in mind the whole time when you're writing it.
That's
Amanda,
really helpful, Amanda.
Sorry, just interrupting. Where would you want to see IT skills and other training courses that aren't necessarily education based, but other qualifications?
Yeah, but again, I would succinct that. I don't put any steer on GCSEs, with all due respect. I would agree with you, Andrea. Maths and English is probably all I need to know. And I'm not even particularly worried if you haven't grade on there. As long as you pass them, that's fine. I would want to see relevant skills. Like, for example, I don't particularly want to know if you've you've got a gardening qualification and you're applying for a coordinator job. I don't particularly want to know if you've got a health and safety qualification if you're not applying for a health and safety role. Some people get into the habit of writing a whole list of courses they've been on. And frankly, it just looks like you've cut and pasted it and not really thought about it. Yeah. Put the key ones on there and that are relevant, and ones where you perhaps passed something at 90%, put that in if you want. That's again a good key point. I think a really good example of this would just be helpful to those listening is that I have a gentleman here in our IT department who's incredibly qualified on software and IT packages. But one of the reasons he got into the interview pile was because he'd written quite a nice couple of sentences about the fact he plays American football. That's quite unusual. Because I had 30, 40 CVs sat on my desk, that got him onto the interview pile because I was just interested to know that was quite a different hobby for an IT specialist, if you know what I mean. So again, sometimes it's simple as that if you've got a volume, and obviously his IT skills are relevant as well. But yes, in answer to your question, Andrea, I don't want to see them all. I don't want to see a whole list. It's not relevant.
Great, thank you, Amanda. So we've got lots of questions coming in, which is really great, and a lot of them really chime with the questions that were asked in advance. So we've got questions coming in about skills, and we've been talking about that already, of course. And so I think people are interested to know a bit more about different ways that skills can be presented in a CV. And I'd just like to ask Jenny for your thoughts on that, if I may, Jenny.
Yeah, thanks, Jill. Yeah, there's definitely a few different ways that you can present skills on your CV. And this often depends on the experience that you've got. So one of the first places, as Amanda and Jill have been talking about, Andrea have been talking about, is the personal profile, having a bit of a personal statement at the start. This is definitely a bit of a subjective area. Some people like them, some people don't. But if they're done well, they can be really impactful. As Amanda was saying, sometimes that's what kind of gets the CV really gets you noticed, that section. So this tends to act as a bit of an introduction to yourself, you know, who you are, and this is a section that you can start highlighting some of those key skills that will hopefully get you noticed. This section can really act as a bit of a hook to get the employer interested and wanting to read more. And it can include references to things like relevant experience and achievements, but also a few key skills, particularly relevant to the role, or perhaps, as Amanda was saying, you know, even other skills that you've got that really show your personality as well. And then you're likely to expand on those points further on in the CV. Definitely with a more traditional CV, like a reverse chronological, as it's often called, you're likely to then weave those skills in amongst the points describing your role. So, for instance, you might say something like handle the caseload of 10 clients, demonstrating strong planning and relationship management skills. So that's a really nice way of embedding it into that employment section. But you might also have a short skills section on the CV, highlighting skills such as technical skills that you know are needed for the role, not those irrelevant ones that you know aren't necessarily needed, or things like languages. IT skills and languages are often really useful to add in there. Or if there's just additional skills that you know is going to make you stand out a little bit, then you can put them in a short section. If your experience is a little bit limited, there's a style of CV that can be used. It's sometimes referred to as a skills CV, and this often includes a more detailed skills section, perhaps on the first page. So this is where you can include skills that are needed for the role, and then include some examples from other areas like university or extracurricular activities or volunteering. And this is just a way of drawing attention to your skill set more than your experience, if that is non-existent or very limited. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But you could have skills listed quite clearly. So, for instance, with something like time management skills, you could say something like forward plan and create to-do lists to monitor progress with university tasks. And ensuring all deadlines are met and tasks completed to a high standard. So you have that really nice compact skill example that really evidences that skill to the employer, and you've linked it to something that you've done before, maybe at uni, maybe through an extracurricular activity or something.
Brilliant, thanks, Jenny. Yeah, so I think we've got a number of people in the audience who are thinking about their own particular experiences, and maybe having no job history, no prior work experience, feel like they've got very bitty short bits of experience. So I wonder what you would say to candidates like that.
Yeah, I think a lot of students in particular, or, you know, a lot of people will really worry about that. And how do you write a CV if you've not had a part-time job before, or you've not done much other experience? So, you know, even if you haven't had previous work experience, you should include details about other things that you've done. So there might be projects that you did at school or university. Maybe you've been on a sports team, you've been in a society, you know, maybe you've helped a friend grow their Instagram brand or an Instagram account or something like that. These are all great experiences that will really help to make you stand out. So just think about other things that you've been involved with and present those really clearly on the CV. I also mentioned perhaps you could have a bit more of a detailed skills section where you draw attention to those skills, and kind of, you know, give examples from some of those other experiences as well. So you'll still include a lot of the similar sections to those that Andrea mentioned earlier, but the experience section might be more about other experiences rather than purely just work experience. So you're still going to have your name, your contact details, that personal profile, and maybe the skills section as well. And I just wanted to point out that, I think people really struggle with that idea about skills. They think, well, I have so many conversations where people say, I just don't have any skills, or I just don't know what my skills are. So have those conversations with peers or the careers teams in your university or anyone else that you can kind of discuss and help them get you to reflect on your skill set, because you are developing skills through all different experiences in your life. During university, you're likely to be developing skills in report writing, collaborating on group projects, planning, organising your workload, and this is all lovely information to tell employers about. And you might even be developing really specific skills that are related to the jobs that you're applying for. So like science-based students might have very specific laboratory skills that they're developing, and you may never have worked in a lab before. But if you're applying for a laboratory job, you'd want to give a good overview of the very specific scientific skills that you're developing through the lab experience that you've got in university. And these can all be, all of the skills can be outlined, throughout the CV in, either in the skills section or in those other experience sections as well.
Brilliant. So Amanda,
Sure.
It sounds like you want to come in now.
I just wanted
to go to you next.
Thank you. I was just going to add that. No, I agree, concur again completely with Jenny. And I think that's absolutely right. That's my advice to people as well when they don't have any specific part-time job experience. There's lots of ways you can do that. But even if you work in a coffee shop, again, you're applying organisational skills or team building or problem solving if someone's cappuccino isn't right or whatever it might be. So there's lots of ways you can do that. But I was also just going to add in as well, one of the things I also like to see in a CV, when you perhaps have got some work experience and you're applying a particular job, very often when we interview, we use a competency-based framework, which I'm sure everybody's familiar with. But again, what's very useful to see on a CV is examples against competencies as almost like an added section somewhere towards the end of the CV, perhaps, but just gives real examples. So some of your competencies might be influencing, persuading, teamwork, organizational skills, problem solves, but the big one is delivering results or solutions. They're the big ones employers look for. And you only need to give a very short example of something you've made done. And I would always encourage people to hold back an example. Don't list them all on your CV, because that's going to be what they're going to probe in an interview. And you want to be able to have a good couple examples to be able to talk through in an interview situation. But what's really useful for an employer is to see what you've actually done against those competencies, which are all, they're not rocket science, any of them, but it gives you a very real picture. And again, a very obvious interview question from a CV or from that information is, what would you do differently? In other words, you delivered that great result, but did you have any obstacles along the way? We talk about blockers in our organisation. What blockers can we remove? So again, I'm almost as keen to see the ones of the success stories, but the ones that perhaps didn't go so well and what you actually did about it. And you can reflect that against competencies in a CV, but without going into lengthy detail. And you can almost bring that in to your job role. So if your last job particularly was very driven about results and problem solving, then bring some real examples in there. So again, it becomes quite real and it brings your CV to life, but it also gives you that standout moment as well.
Brilliant. Thanks, Amanda. I know that we've got a very international audience today, and I've noticed a specific comment about this, but we'd had also prepared something about it. For those of you who might be thinking about outlining work experience that you've done in your home country, in a way that would attract UK employers. And Andrea, I know that you do a lot of work with international job candidates. So can I go to you on that, please?
Yeah, my thoughts, and again, I don't know if Amanda or Jenny would agree, but my thoughts are experience is experience, whether you've got it overseas or in the UK. So I would say that exactly the same format, highlighting your skills, highlighting your achievements. But one thing I think is really important is your education you need to try and find what the equivalent is in the UK, so people can see what level you're at. So I just think sometimes, not all countries do A levels, but if you've done an exam that is equivalent to A level standard here, or graduate, that you just need to put a little bit equivalent to, just so that employers can see that. But we touched on it very briefly in terms of skills. Languages is also really important. So make sure you put that in your sort of personal profile or your skills section, the languages that you can speak and write, because communication in today's society is, it's really important to have those additional skills, and can often make you stand out from other candidates. I think that's
Brilliant.
about as much as I need to say really on that.
That's great. So I think it might be worth us going to, there's loads of questions coming through in the chat now. So I'm going to try and pull some of these, some themes out, if you can, for if I can, for us to focus on. So we've got people asking questions about particular questions about things like, should we put a photo on a CV? Should we put our home address? Those sorts of things. So, I mean, my view is always, when I've been advising people about that, is you only put on it information that the employer can usefully use in deciding whether they want to meet with you. So I don't know, Jenny, what would you say about that?
Yeah, no, I definitely wouldn't recommend putting a photo in, except I think there's a few exceptions, aren't there? If it's an acting CV or something. But yeah, no, definitely, it's just not common practice, which is crazy these days, because then we have LinkedIn profiles, don't we? And we're like, do put your photo on your LinkedIn, but not on the CV. And sorry, what was the other part of that question?
Address.
Address.
Home address.
Sorry, yeah. I tend to discourage the home address nowadays, and just say maybe put a city location rather than your very specific home address, which could lead to discrimination. If you're from particular areas, yeah, I would just maybe put a city or region.
And we've had a few questions in about sort of standard CV length. People struggling to get CVs up to 2 pages or down to 2 pages, and wanting some thoughts from employers and maybe Unitemps clients about CV length. Andrea, what would you say about that? I'm not hearing Andrea, so I'm going to ask Amanda.
Yes, I have a fairly strong view on this one, actually. I think it should be 2 pages maximum, however great your skills are. And I actually quite like it if someone can get it onto 1 page and do a summary. That makes my life so much easier when you're printing off for interviews and such like. But I think it's about making sure the important information is on there. So if you really can't get it onto 2 pages, don't, in other words, cut off the good stuff. But I definitely think you should aim for 2 pages. And actually, most CVs I've been involved in helping people to redraft, even with lots of skills and information, we've still managed to pretty much get it to 2 pages. So I would say, if you're putting your line in the sand, I would say aim for 2 pages. But also, if you can do a summary onto 1 page, make sure it's solidly done. And if you look at one of the ideas I've shared about your details down a column down the side, you could even achieve that onto 1 page. And certainly CVs with 3 or 4 pages, you can be absolutely assured that not every page will unfortunately be read. It's just too long.
I mean, there are obviously exceptions. So if you're applying for an academic job, then that's a specialist area where, but even then you can separate out publications and presentations and things like that from your main info. Now, of course, one easy way of getting a document shorter is to make the font smaller, isn't it? But I guess we're going to say that's not a great idea, because that just affects readability. So don't think about that as a shortcut. What sort of font size and fonts do you recommend, Jenny?
Do you want me to list some specific fonts that I like?
Come up in the chat. It's very personal, isn't it?
Yeah, I
letters,
definitely go for like Arial or Calibri.
Calibri.
I feel like
Yeah.
Times New Roman looks a little bit outdated now, but it does look professional, so that's a good one. I was just going to say as well, there are definitely some industries where the one-page CV is very much preferred, like in the media and I
Yeah.
think investment banking and some other finance roles, but yeah, the two-page CV is generally kind of standard practice.
Some really interesting comments coming through, reflected in these Q&As. Actually, someone's commented that tailoring CVs for different jobs is frustrating, and I completely get that. It is, but I guess what we're emphasising today is how to maximise your chances of success and getting having a CV that will enable you to get to meet with the employer and make your case in person, if you like.
Yeah, I mean, I
there is
often
actually a way. Sorry, Andrea.
Sorry, I often see CVs that are just a general CV because they'll say really looking for a career in the media industry and they're applying for an accountancy job. You've got to check your CV, making sure that it's tailored to what you're applying for.
Yeah. Better to make 5 successful applications that get you an interview than 50 that don't.
Yeah. I mean, I think Amanda, the other thing, just going to add to that, the way round that is, if you want to not have to keep bespoking your CV, I'm quite happy to see a generic CV, but then add to your attachment on your CV a short paragraph or a paragraph in the email that says, the reason I believe my CV is relevant this role is because. So in other words, context your general CV against your role and pick out some of the role highlights to just link it through. So if you don't want to keep bespoking a CV, I'm not saying I'm not actually that precious about that. I'm more keen to see everything. But I think what you've got to do is context in some way, either on the email or on another attachment, not necessarily a cover letter. But another thing I quite like to see is people will send me a generic CV for a role, but then they will attach a sort of a skills match as a separate document. Sometimes that will come from an agency, but sometimes that will come from the individual. So it's almost an upgrade of a cover letter, but it also gives you the link to the general role without you having to change the whole CV. So there are other ways around it, is what I'm saying, if you don't want to keep changing your CV. And as Andrea said, run the risk of sending the wrong CV to the wrong role, sort of thing. Yeah. Because a lot of your CV information will be repetitive, but I think you've got to be able to show the employer that you've read the job spec and the job advert or whatever it might be to show where your skills match. Because to me, it's all about skills match. What have you got in your, locker room, so to speak, metaphorically, that I can use in the job that I'm advertising for.
You could also link it to the company's ethos, the values, if they align with yours. So that's quite useful as well.
Yeah, some useful stuff coming out. I mean, a lot of these points show how personal a CV is, and we might even have different views. So ultimately, it's your document. You are the person who has to be happy with it, aren't you? We've got a question that's come in about gaps in CVs. Of course, gaps can come about for all sorts of different reasons. And I wonder, Jenny, what you'd have to say to a candidate presenting to you who was concerned about gaps in their CV.
Yeah, so sometimes people have work gaps, but they're in higher education or education at that time. So I wouldn't classify that as a gap, because sometimes people will come and say, I haven't worked for the last 2 years, but they have been studying. So that is, you've been filling your time with education. Depending on what's gone on, it might be a very personal issue. There might have been poor health or illness or something. It might be that it makes sense to just address it in a cover letter or in the email, and just, if you feel comfortable, just sharing what was going on during that time. And it might be that you did other things during that period, and that would be a really positive thing to draw attention to. I did some online courses, or I was actually playing tennis every week at the sports centre. So you're kind of showing other things that you kind of did achieve, but that obviously isn't always the case. I think it's definitely dependent on what was going on during that period. It could be something like maternity leave, and that's just very clearly evident. I had gap in employment due to raising a family or taking maternity or what have you.
I would just add to that to say, completely agree with you, Jenny, but also don't leave the gaps in the CVs. Do your best to context it without obviously sharing personal sensitive information you don't want to, because most employers will pick up on those gaps. So it's better to not leave them in and not explain them. Or if you want to just put a footnote at the bottom to say, I'm happy to talk through the gap in my career at my interview or whatever it might be, but just don't leave it that it's a gap without any explanation, because that will, certainly line managers will just go into overdrive of imagination of what it might or might not be. And exactly as you say, Jenny, sometimes it's easy as, it could be a family illness, it could be maternity or paternity, or as you say, education, a very legitimate reason. Just because it isn't a job, it's still a period of time that you need to be able to share as best you can.
Thank you. We've had a number of questions about automated systems sifting CVs and reading them, and about preparing documents suitable for that sort of first sift. And I wonder, Andrea, Amanda, whether you have any thoughts about that.
So you just repeat that.
So it's where the CV goes in and it highlights. It goes into a tracking system. So a lot of times it's using like graduate jobs and things like that, where it's looking for specific words, keywords and key skills. I suppose if you've covered in your CV the skills that they're looking for in the job spec, so reading the job spec, reading the person spec, and making sure that you've got, as Amanda said earlier, highlighting those competencies, then you shouldn't be skipped through on the tracking system.
I mean, I don't use a tracking system. I can genuinely say I read every CV. I confess I skim read it first, then I read it again properly later. But I don't necessarily, I agree with you, Andrea, in your situation, when you've got big volume, then you've got to do something to do an initial sift. And I know when I was at the BBC, we used something similar. But I think you're absolutely right. If all the right information and content is in that CV, people shouldn't over worry about a sifting system, because there's always going to be some sifting process, whether it be manual or automated. And if your CV is solid, it'll go through that sifting process successfully. So I wouldn't overthink that, to be quite honest, because you can't control that, to be quite honest with you, completely.
Good thought. Jenny, anything to add on that?
Just made, like, at some point somebody's sifting, whether it's a human or a tracking system, but and we're all kind of looking for the same things, like the relevant experience or key skills. It is helpful, I guess, to try and pick out keywords from a job advertisement, because that can help with that sift using an ATS, and that is where we kind of think that's where the tailoring the CV, showing the relevancy of previous jobs, highlighting key skills that are going to be really important for that role. If you're doing that, then hopefully it is going to get through that ATS.
Lovely.
I think the other thing I would just add to that as well is, and it sort of goes into the sort of link of the sifting process. If I've got a CV that I'm genuinely undecided about, if there is a mobile number on there, I will very often ring and say, and at an appropriate time, obviously as best I can, I say, can you spare me 5 or 10 minutes to just talk me through some of the things I'm a little bit unclear on in your CV, because that will then give me the option to take it to interview or not. So to almost, if you're going to put a mobile number on a call, don't assume the sifting is not done necessarily through a automated process or human. It could be someone phoning you like me to say, could I just understand that a little bit better, and then I would make the decision by the end of the phone call, or thank them for their CV and say I'm still looking at it and considering it. Because sometimes I've rung people on a mobile and I've had some very strange answers because they haven't realised they put their mobile on their CV and they weren't expecting a call from me. So if you're sending a CV to an employer and you're putting a mobile in there, don't be surprised if they give you a quick ring.
Okay,
and on that, sorry, if you are applying for a job and you've put your telephone number on there, make sure your voicemail is professional.
Yes, I agree with that entirely as well.
Okay, so we're getting to the end of our time today. I know that we haven't been able to answer all the questions. Some of them are very specific to individual circumstances. So, for example, where there's a case of redeployment, in which case I would think that there might be an entitlement or an opportunity to get some one-to-one help. And I would always encourage people, as well as using resources like this recording and the resources that we're going to share in the chat. It's always really useful if you've got access to someone who can give you some feedback one-to-one on your CV, to talk through your personal circumstances and how they're being presented. But I want, before we finish today, to go to each of the panelists and ask them really just succinctly, perhaps with a do and a don't, to answer the question, what makes a CV stand out? Andrea, I'll go to you first, please.
Do make sure that you spell check and grammatically check your CV and get somebody to read it. Don't overcomplicate things. Use simple and concise language.
Lovely, thank you. How about you, Jenny?
Do tailor the CV as best as you can. Try and highlight key skills and key achievements, and try and get a bit of personality in there. Remember, it's a personal document. Sometimes they feel a bit robotic and you just can't get a sense for the person. So try and get a little bit of personality through as well. And don't waffle, I guess. Yeah, kind of similar to what Andrea said, like try and use nice, concise, easy to read language.
Lovely.
Yeah, I'd agree with all of that as well. I would say do absolutely sell yourself well. Put all your key standout moments in there. Make sure it does tell you about you as the person, not just you as the skill set. Really try and get across your best assets sort of thing in terms of what you do well on a paper version, which is obviously sometimes difficult. And make sure that anything that you think is perhaps a little bit undecided, take the feedback from a family member or a close friend to say, should I add that in, should I not? I mean, people often say, is it too overkill to say I was captain of a sports team or I achieved a first? No, it isn't. Put it on. Those are great selling points, but also look for the unobvious ones that are going to be a little bit more unusual, that are going to create a talking point in an interview or get you in the interview pile. And I think the classic thing is don't rush it. As exactly as Jenny and Andrea said, tailor your CV well, make sure it is accurate, up to date. I've even had ones where the phone numbers aren't up to date, so you can't get hold of people, or they've not put a time that you can't ring them at midday because and don't just send it out without any thought. Make it a bit personalized. I always like it when someone says, dear Amanda, how are you? Thank you very much. Love to, make it a little bit more that I'm making them already. They're trying to build a rapport with me, so to speak, rather than just, send a CV. There's nothing with it. I don't know where it is. I don't know what it's applying for. I'm not clear. So, spend some time on it, and when you're actually applying for a job, sit and think what you want to send and why, and think what the recipients, someone like myself or Andrea or Jenny, are going to read when they see it. So, get someone to look at it before you send it, because sometimes you can be over familiar. And as I say, I get the impression sometimes people just scattergun applications, and it just feels very rushed when you receive it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much to all of the panelists for sharing their insights today from different perspectives, from what a particular employer in a particular context wants to see, what Andrea working in a recruitment agency sees as that sort of interface between clients and candidates, and Jenny working with their students and graduates at Liverpool John Moores on their CVs in a really wide range of contexts. And thank you all for being here and for your attention and your questions, which have been brilliant. And I'm really sorry that we haven't been able to cover absolutely everything, but my Q&A has been pinging away. It's been wonderful to see you all so engaged. We will have a recording of the webinar available on the Unitemps website, and if you signed up for this webinar, you'll be emailed a link to that recording once it's been published. And we have had a number of requests for further resources, and we've put some in the chat, but there's more on the Unitemps website too. And we'd love it if you would follow us on social media. We're on Instagram, Twitter, X, LinkedIn and Facebook. And we'd love to hear from you there. Thank you very much for attending. Do let us know how you found the webinar, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill.
Thanks, Jill.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. Thanks, Jenny.
Thanks, everyone.